How many people in the room have a ham radio license? Pretty good showing, kind of what I'd expect. How many of you that don't have ham radio licenses know what ham radio is? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the ARDC and its grant-making process. Also at the end, we'll be talking about some of the things that we're working on this year. My compatriot here, John, is the head of our technical committee, so you can grab him if that interests you, but I'm going to talk to you about grants. Okay, so you can read this, but so can I. The mission of amateur radio digital communications is to support, promote, and enhance digital communication and broader communication science and technology to promote amateur radio, scientific research, experimentation, education, development, open access, and innovation in information communications technology. It's a mouthful. Basically, we're promoting ham radio and also certain forms of digital communication. We're a 501c3. That's a nonprofit foundation in the U.S. 501c3 has some different categories of foundation, is tightly managed and doesn't necessarily reach out for funding from multiple sources. And we have to operate under a certain set of rules, and we'll get into that a little bit. We have an endowment which we can distribute approximately $5 to $6 million a year out of. In fact, we have to give out a certain amount of money each year because we're a foundation. And so we don't say how much is in that endowment, but we have to give away 5% a year. So all the mathematicians in the room know that we're somewhere around that amount, 20 times that amount. That endowment was created because back in the early 1980s, packet radio was a thing, a new thing. And a gentleman named Hank Magnuski, who actually still is a volunteer for ARDC, went to John Postel. Anyone here hear of John Postel before? He was the god of internet addresses back then. You'd go to him and say, I'm IBM, I need some IP addresses, and he'd give you 16 million of them, okay? It's called a Class A network. So Hank went to John and said, hey, could we set aside for amateur radio some addresses? And John said, sure, here's a Class A, 16 million addresses. Well, that's a lot of addresses. And a few years ago, well, a little bit of the history there. It was passed down, the stewardship of those addresses, through a series of individuals. And then about 10, 12 years ago, ARDC was formed to be the steward of the address space, because unfortunately some of us die over time. And so it's good to have a foundation there that carries that on. And then in 2019, we took the step and said, hey, we're not using 16 million addresses for amateur radio. Maybe we could sell some of them. So we sold 4 million of those addresses, again, to a company that I cannot tell you who it is because the contracts say that. But if you go check out our 990 tax filing, you can find out who it is. So anyway, they bought them, and they paid market price for them at the time. The market price has gone up since then. We could have gotten a lot more money holding on for a few more years. But so given that, we have this bank of money that we need to give away, and we want to find people to give it away to. And that's my job, is to find people to give money to. It's a tough job. I've spent 42 calendar days this year going out and meeting with groups like this to educate them on how they get their hands on that money. There are some qualifications. We also do not actively do fundraising. We've got this endowment. We operate out of that endowment. However, if someone wanted to bequest some money or something like that, we have a way to do that, but we don't actively go out and fundraise. We don't have members. There's no membership to ARDC. We operate as a foundation. We have a very small staff. There's 6 of us. John's our newest hire. We're a California-based foundation. We had no California-based employees, so we had to hire John because he lives here in California. I live up near Seattle. Our main website is www.ampr.org. Anyone know why it's AMPR? Yep, that's where it comes from. And we have a board of volunteers. They're all very senior, very experienced. People like Phil Karn and John Gilmore, who you may have heard of, Casey, who's an academic at UCSD, and some others. And they do an excellent job as a bunch of volunteers. So we have some requirements if we're going to give you money, and most of these are governed by law, so that's what we do. So there are 3 basic groups that we can give money to. 501c3 nonprofits, those can be charities or other foundations and so on, or their international equivalents, because we are an international organization. We make grants internationally. There's some complexity to doing international, but we're willing to do that. If you happen to be international and you apply and we accept you, we have to go through something called an equivalency determination, where a bunch of lawyers look over your documents and the laws from your country to make sure you're equivalent to a US 501c3. We pay for that if we pick you, so you don't have to come up with the processing fees. Nonprofit educational organizations, universities, schools, so on, we can do that. Government-sponsored projects that align with our goals, we can give money to the government. I've never known a government to turn away money. Actually, they do, because there's some reporting responsibilities. And that also includes tribes, the tribal governments. We've done a few grants into tribes. So if you are like, in many cases, you have an informal group that is an amateur radio club that hasn't become a 501c3, you can go to an existing 501c3 and have them fiscally sponsor you. If they're also a foundation, it's tougher. They fall under the same rules we are. If they're a charity or an educational institution, then they can sponsor you and they can handle the money and hand it out to you as needed. We do allow a small amount of money, less than 20% of the value of the grant, for someone providing that service to you. There are also independent organizations, one based here in California called Open Collective. You can go to them and apply. If they accept you, then they will be your fiscal sponsor, and they take a nominal fee of like 8% or 10% on top of it. And we're okay with that. All righty. Whoops, did I bounce ahead? Okay, so we have a few categories that we like to fund. Support and growth of amateur radio, kind of what you would expect for it. If you've got a project that will add to the growth of amateur radio, whether that's teaching classes or building out some infrastructure. We've done a few microwave IP networks that are specifically for amateur radio, some other things. I mean, one of the things that we have is we still have addresses that we can hand out, which are fully routable IP addresses, so you can talk to them from the internet and so on. Community outreach things, support type infrastructure, some emergency communications projects. We seem to have a whole bunch of people that think it's really cool to buy a trailer and put some equipment in it and let it sit 360 days of the year. When we put money in something, we want it to be used. And We may do those, but you better come to with the plan of how you're going to do more than let it sit parked somewhere. You know, you got a regular schedule of going around to schools and exposing students or other things like that. I guess I keep touching the pad here accidentally. Okay, so education's the second one. It's not hard and fast, but we basically give a quarter of that $5 million to scholarship funds. So ARRL, we've done the Society of Women Engineers, we've done we're really interested in increasing the diversity in the amateur radio community, so we're really looking for opportunities that help us do that. So we've done some historically black colleges and university scholarships and some others. The scholarships need to be for STEM-related type activities. So about a quarter of the money goes there. We also do for K-12 type projects. I don't know that we've done a fellowship, but we'd consider a fellowship. We've funded a lot of different educational opportunities out there. Research and development. This is one that's near and dear to my heart, and we want to see a lot more of these collectively, which is where you're extending the art. And this is where the hackerspace community can really come in. We'd be looking for things like, one that we're funding is called the M17 project, which is a digital voice system that competes basically with D-Star and DMR and Fusion, but it's 100% open source, including the vocoder. And we're funding the development of that. There's some others out there like that. If you have a project that will advance the art, new applications that might run on digital communications, that kind of thing, that are ham radio related. Don't have to be ham radio related, but they tend to get more of the attention. And we just like to see more of those, and that's why I'm here, besides listening to a bunch of cool presentations. One that was interesting to me earlier was the open source ASIC project that they were talking about. Nothing I say says you're going to get approved, but we would look at something like that as long as it was being done on a nonprofit basis and open source. In fact, anything that we fund has to be open source. Okay, so to apply for a grant, you can apply for a grant anytime. It's done online. We collect them, review them, and select grants that we're going to fund 4 times a year. The next review period starts February 1st. So anything that's submitted between now and February 1st will be in that batch. Once it's gone through our internal process, which can take, unfortunately, 2 to 4 months sometimes. So don't come to us and say, we need money in March, in February. Come to us in February and say, we need money in July, okay, kind of thing. And basically, again, we have a small crew. So once you're submitted, don't call us, we'll call you if we need more information. Because people say, oh, I put in my application, you know, we won't know until the whole process is done. But we'll notify you as soon as we have a yes or no for you. And like I say, if we have questions, we'll reach out to you. So, and the application is done online. Anyone here written a government grant or an educational grant before? Okay, you can forget that. We're much more friendly than that. Basically, there's a couple of ways you can apply. We have a series of questions in the application. You can just fill those out. The level of detail is probably directly related to the total amount of the grant. So if you're asking for $2,000, we don't need a big book about every little detail. But if you're asking for $1.5 million, we'd like to understand why. Also, the reporting on it is a lot lighter as well. We're not looking for monthly spreadsheets of how you expended the funds and stuff. At the end of the project, you give us a report. We said we'd do this, we did this, we spent the money you sent us to do these things. If your project runs over a year, we'll ask for one at a year and then again later. Okay, and that's the website. So I won't go through everything, but here's some things to think about if you're going to do a grant request. Be sure to review all the information on the website first. I don't know how many times I've gotten an email. Tell me what the website said. You know, well, go read it and then come back and ask me pertinent questions. Most of our projects are what's called shovel ready. You've already planned it out. You've figured out what you want to do, what your metrics are going to be as you do the project and so on. We tend to like 1 year projects, but if it's 2 years, it's no big. If it's really long, it has to be something really significant. An example of that would be we gave funds to the ARDC program, I think $1.25 million, something like that. 5-year program. We fund up front typically, so they got the money up front. Part of the reason for that particular formula is NASA doesn't like projects that they don't know where the fund's going to be. So the ARDC folks, we worked with them and made that happen. But in general, we're looking for a different scope. Another one is if you're going to be working with other groups or facilities and stuff, have it all lined up. We've had a proposal before where, oh, we're going to build this great network and we're going to put all these microwave links on tops of mountains, and they hadn't negotiated the sites. They knew what sites they wanted to use, but when they went back there, well, you know, if you got money, we want more money kind of thing, you know. So have that all lined up. When you put together your budget, include everything, taxes, fees, any permits that you need. If you're going to need professional services like a tower climber or an electrician, have that all in the budget right at the beginning. And as I said, 20% for indirect costs. Also, the other thing is a lot of times we have a few hams in the room. They like to be frugal, and we like that. But if we're going to buy equipment to support a program, we want it to last a while. So we'd rather spend, say, $3,000 for a new repeater than you get Fred to give you his 20-year-old repeater for $900. So find good functional equipment, but don't gold plate it. You know, don't buy the $9,000 repeater because your buddy gets a good commission off of it. And have a project plan. Again, the detail of that project plan is probably more directly related to the size of the project you're working on and the cost of that. Really make your project stand out. When we first started, when I had that chart of money we gave you the first year, you saw 9 million instead of 5. We were doing some catch up. And so basically, if you'd applied in that time frame, your chances of getting it through, as long as you met the requirement, were pretty good. Now we're getting, well, this last quarter that just closed the beginning of October, we had a total number of applications that exceeded what we give away a year. And so some aren't going to get approved, obviously. So provide some previous accomplishments that you've done so that, you know, you got a little bit of a track record. If you're a brand new group, explain that, but maybe tell us a little bit about the people that are going to be doing it and some of their accomplishments. We're really big on outreach and building community around the project that you're doing. You do need to adhere to our open access and open source policies. And open access includes things like if you came to us and said, we're going to build this great repeater network and everybody that's going to use it has to join our club and pay $200 a year, we're not interested in those projects. There's nothing wrong with soliciting membership, but it shouldn't be a requirement if we're paying for the equipment, okay? Anything that you're doing that is truly innovative, tell us about it. Tell us how it's innovative. But understand what may be innovative to you, someone else has already done. So, you know, it may be new for your group. You know, you just discovered FM, you know, kind of thing. But that's not innovation. That's just getting there. Inclusiveness and equity are really important. Are you reaching out to a broader community? Not everyone looks like me, old, gray, and ready to kick the bucket. Youth particularly, you know, finding the grain of the hobby. We don't need a book, but be complete in your description. Also include if you're doing any other fundraising. You know, if you come in and you ask us for $30,000 and you say, but we've also raised $10,000 on our own, that's going to carry more weight than, well, just give us $40,000 because you got money, right? So keep those things that you're writing. And finally, a statement of how your project will make a difference, make the world a better place. So catch me. I'm only going to be here today. I've got to get back home. I've got a child that's got a medical situation right now, so I'm leaving first thing tomorrow morning. That's my direct number, or you can use that email address, or in general, you just email the giving@ardc.net. That comes to both me and the grants manager. So once your grant is approved, Chelsea, who's wonderful, takes over. And you'll be interacting with her, and that's a good address to have and be familiar with. We couldn't do this without a bunch of volunteers, and we have 2 standing committees, and we're recruiting volunteers right now. We recompose the committees for each calendar year, and so we're at the end of this calendar year, so we're trying to build up the list. If you apply and are accepted as a volunteer for one of these committees, you can serve up to 3 terms, and then you have to step out for at least a year. And what some folks do is they just switch committees because they really love what we do. So what do the 2 committees do? Well, the Technical Advisory Committee, which John is the staff representative for, sets our policy and manages the remaining IP address space and does technical innovation kinds of things. It's really a good place to share your knowledge and expertise on technology and networking. The Grants Advisory Committee, which I'm the staff representative, that's my second hat for, we decide we recommend who gets the money. So when the applications come in, that committee reviews them, weighs them against each other. We have a ranking process. We're trying to get the best proposals in each class and pass that along to the board, who generally takes the recommendation of the committee. There's a couple QR codes if you need the URLs. So consider if that's something you'd like to contribute back to the community by volunteering. We're actively, by November 12th, we need your application. If someone slips a day, we probably will let it in anyway, but we're shooting for November 12th. And finally, Q&A. That QR code will take you to a link tree with a bunch of URLs.